You are listening to the War on the Rocks podcast on strategy, defense, and foreign affairs. My name is Ryan Evans. I'm the founder of War on the Rocks, and I'm sitting here with three old personal friends and professional friends of the show, the hosts of Net Assessment, Chris Preble of the Stimson Center, Melanie Marlow of CSIS, and Zack Cooper of a little think tank startup, little outfit called the American Enterprise Institute.
Yeah, this is what I get for calling War on the Rocks a blog.
Yeah. I think it's, I don't know if AEI's got any big name funders yet, or I think it's just like people, it's like Bernie Sanders donors just mailing in $1 here or $1 there, right?
You know, I'm just going to note that there was a new AEI for a little while that Chris was affiliated with, and the old gone. AEI has made it. We're now the new AEI, actually, in fact.
That's right.
I'm having you all on the show to draw attention to the fact that Net Assessment's coming back after a summer and fall hiatus. Probably record our first episode back after Thanksgiving, which I'm very excited about. But for your fans out there, what have you guys been up to this summer and fall?
I have mostly been focused on a project that I'm working on with Michael Cohen and Monica Duffy-Toft at the Fletcher School at Tufts on Afghanistan. We have identified a series of key assumptions that we believe were sort of guiding or misguiding U.S. Policy in Afghanistan from 2001 through 2021. And we have been sort of really, I've thrown myself into it to a certain extent. Michael is sort of the principal writer, and we have a couple fantastic researchers there at Fletcher. So that's been a good project, and I've learned a lot. We did spin off an article tied to the Israel-Hamas war, sort of drawing parallels between the U.S. response to 9/11 and the Israeli response to 10/7, which was in foreign affairs.
Sound a little more excited about it, Chris. You sound bored by your own work here. Let's get a little.
I am excited. It's really.
Do you need some coffee?
It's important because we have the work of the Afghanistan War Commission, and we know some of the folks on that commission, and we have a lot of hopes for what they're working on, but we also see the benefit of us working as an independent team outside of that process, and we also got a little bit of a head start on them. They were a little slow out of the gate, not their fault, and so
Congress took their time naming the commissioners.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's been my main project, and then at Stimson I have a strategy paper that I've been working on that'll come out hopefully before the end of the year.
It was one of those great situations where Congress was in violation of its own laws, where it said we shall set commissioners by this date, and then they're like, who calls them out when they fail to do that? Not really nobody. Brian's still waiting on his Navy commission. Same thing, same issue.
Exactly.
What do you guys make of the Afghan commission? You think it's going to be anything more than a political exercise? Do you think it's actually going to dig deep? There's some people that I really admire involved in it, such as Jeff Dressler. John Schroden's going to be the research director, I believe.
That's right.
He's very sharp.
John Schroden was actually one of the members of our steering committee, and I have a lot of respect for Jonathan. He's fantastic. And there are a couple other commissioners on there that I also have a lot of respect for, and so I think it's good to sort of bet the under on a commission of any kind. That's just a good strategy in Washington. But I think there's a possibility that this commission could actually help us learn some important lessons from the war.
I've owed Jeff, who's a good friend, a War on the Rocks t-shirt for the entire lifespan of War on the Rocks. I just never gave it to him.
Maybe not still a good friend anymore.
I don't have a War on the Rocks t-shirt. Where's my War on the Rocks t-shirt?
I do. I just don't fit into mine anymore. Well, that should be an interesting project. I'm interested to see what you guys come up with there. How much longer is it going to last?
At least another year, and we're hopeful that we can secure funding for our third year.
Melanie, what was your summer vacation like?
I didn't really have a summer vacation in the sense that I spent time sitting in a room writing, which I would love to be doing right now. There's so much going on in the world, and it'd be nice to take some concentrated time and think about things. But I don't talk a lot about my work on the podcast, but I do have a consulting firm that does mostly missiles, missile defense, and munitions. So it's been an extremely busy. I was going to say it was busy 3 years ago, and then it got really, really busy a year and a half ago, and then it's just been incredibly busy again in the last month. The world just keeps erupting, and no rest for the weary. But I'm not doing the kind of work others are doing. Yeah.
You're here to solve our defense industrial base crisis.
Oh yeah, I've got all that.
You got it figured out.
all the congressional stuff, all the supplementals.
Could you break it down to a single PowerPoint slide for me?
We're in trouble.
It's end of the week, so my attention span is waning.
No, I mean I think that there are some good opportunities here. I hate to be crass about it. I've said it on podcasts before, and I still really believe it. If the situation in Ukraine had not happened, I don't think we'd be as serious as we are about the changes that we need to make. But I also believe that we are extremely slow in actually getting things done. I mean, just the time it still takes for contracts to happen. People who hired, a year ago or more than a year ago for things that they were told were coming, they've got, those people are ready to leave because they can't have them just sitting there waiting for the lines to start moving. It's really taken a lot of time. And I'm not going to lie, we can talk about Supplemental itself maybe a little bit later or in a future podcast. But I was extremely disappointed that with all of the money, again, that is going for things that I, might be really good causes and I think are really good causes, but we can have a fight about that. Just the real disappointment with what, again, is going for Taiwan, what is going to the Indo-Pacific. And I'm still waiting for the true pivot, but maybe Zack will make me feel better about that. I don't know.
On the industrial base stuff, it's been really underwhelming for me. The most critical munition for Ukraine is the 155 artillery round. As if you listen to the show, you know that Mike and I talk about it ad nauseum. And, we've doubled production?
Yeah.
And we're the greatest power in the world, and that's all we can manage in a year and a half. And Europe is still way behind.
Yes, if you want me to, I can complain about Europe again. But Doug,
and that's by the way, ammunition critical for Ukraine, not one that's going to be important for us in a shooting war. And the stuff that's important for us, we're still being even slower on, remarkably. So
yeah, it's a real disappointment. I mean, Doug Bush, the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisition, was talking, I think, on Tuesday, and he gave great numbers that are very aspirational, but those are years away, and it's just really hard to think that we are not ready for the things that we need to be doing.
Yeah. And I don't think it's a lack of smart people, motivated people looking at the problem and with the right ideas in this administration and in the civil service and elsewhere. It's funding. It's a sense of urgency from Congress. It's political will from the White House to invest more political capital in making this move faster. But anyway, Zack?
It's bad. I mean, I
think that's a good place to end the show. Thank you for listening to this episode of The War on the Rocks.
I'm agreeing with everything Melanie's saying on the frustration about the Taiwan funding, which, by the way, probably won't happen.
Could you give us the 101 on that?
Yeah. So, we've got, $100 billion?
106.
106 in the large supplemental, not the skinny one. And of that, $2 billion goes to Taiwan. So, I think that tells you where your priorities are. And don't get me wrong, I'm a big supporter.
Of that, how much goes to Taiwan?
Two. And change.
2.3, yeah.
Yeah. And I'm a supporter of the Ukraine funding. I'm a supporter of the Israel funding. I'm a supporter of the submarine industrial base funding. I understand that you have to also throw border money in there or else you're not going to get a deal. So I'm not criticizing the rest of that supplemental. But given the amount of talk in Washington about how we've got to get serious on Taiwan, you would have thought there would have been some number above 2, right?
I mean, I'd never expect it to be what I think it actually should be anymore. I've just sort of given up on that.
Yeah, and I was just in Australia, and it's interesting that Australians are having a big debate about first whether they should spend more on defense or not, but also about whether they should reallocate money across the services because of the threat landscape that they face. And that still is not even a debate that we are willing to consider having, despite the fact that we live in a Asia world that's dominated by water. So yeah, it's frustrating.
So Ryan, can I ask a question? Is that allowed on the show?
Yeah, sure.
You say you're consistently disappointed by how much people are asking for. Is that a fair restatement of your position?
Well, who do you mean? Who do you mean by people?
Well, we were just talking about is that $2 billion. I've never been happy with what we bring.
No, I mean I think we need to be spending much more aggressively on lots of defense issues right now.
Okay, so that was my point. That's what I thought you said. So we have this absurd gimmick that Mike Johnson is playing with the $14 billion of Ukraine aid offset by $14 billion of cuts to the Internal Revenue Service.
Except it's not actually offset.
Which CBO reports correctly will in fact not result in $14 billion in offset, et cetera. Is it surprising to anyone that no one is calling for higher taxes? I mean that seriously. I'm not being a smartass.
Why raise taxes when you can just have more debt, Chris?
But the answer, okay, well, that's the answer is then no one really cares about debt, like ever.
It's election year,
and yet we have a fight every year over the debt ceiling, which is like there's this absurdity, there's this kabuki theater around money, where no one can take this seriously. Certainly, I don't. I mean, look, we had a surtax during the Vietnam War. If this was absolutely essential for U.S. national security, why is no one talking about a surtax? I mean it seriously. But isn't that what we mean by the president needs to make an affirmative case for this? This is vital to U.S. national security.
I think Biden should definitely call for higher taxes in an election year and then not get reelected. Yeah, I think that would be great, Chris.
But we've talked about this for a long time, right? The president needs to go out and make a big speech on why all of this is important. And when is that going to happen?
We don't need a big speech.
When is that?
But he gave a speech. What? He gave a speech from the Oval Office. It was pretty. He gave an Oval Office speech.
But to say, and this is what the costs are going to be, and why they should be borne. But you're right. It's always an election year.
No, but
right.
Forget taxes. I mean, I get your point, Chris. But we're not going to figure that one out. But the fact is there could be White House political support for much bigger spending on things that resource the actual strategy that we've set for the Indo-Pacific, for example, like this holdup on submarines and AUKUS and shipyards. Like the fact that the Shipyard Act didn't pass 2 years ago is an embarrassment. Yeah, no one even knows what it is.
That is pure idiocy, and it would have solved many problems,
Huge problems.
This proposal to spend $30, $40, $50 billion on shipyards, open up potentially a third line. You'd actually be building Virginia-class submarines as fast as you need them, which means you could actually sell them to the Australians without worrying about entering a submarine trough right when you think you're going to have to fight. And oh, by the way, yeah, I mean, $30 billion is a lot of money. I get that. But in the big scheme of the amounts of money that we're talking about, it's actually not.
And the reason it got held up in committee, by the way, and I won't name names, was because one member of Senate Armed Services Committee thought it very important that the Army also get the same amount for its training ranges, which is just like, and then it died, and then everyone forgot about
it. These people are not serious.
The money was there. I mean, I understand that we're in debt, but the dollar also powers the global economy, which gives us some license there. It's not like we needed to go looking under the couch cushions for this money.
Well, no, clearly, $106 billion supplemental, which is apparently, we don't even break a sweat for. So, yeah, you're right.
I mean, we don't break the sweat for the $2 trillion that we spend, every couple of years on some giant, throwaway for, whether it's IRA or COVID relief, right? I mean, these have been huge bills.
Loans.
Yeah.
So it looks like, despite the wishes of, I think, almost all Republicans in the House, it looks like we're heading towards a shutdown, even though Speaker Johnson clearly doesn't want, but they just don't have their act together yet. So it's looking like there's going to be a shutdown. What's going to be the impact on that, on defense issues?
If it's like any other shutdown, in the end, it'll end up costing more money than if they had stayed open. That's what usually happens, right?
Yeah, I think you're losing something like $700 million a week, I think was the right figure, something like that.
Okay.
It's a lot of money.
Yeah. But then, and then they're made whole after the fact. Many are.
But everything stops. New investments stop. New programs stop.
Right.
Right before Thanksgiving, it just seems like political suicide for the Republicans, but they're going to do it anyway. Hasn't stopped them before. But what are the other impacts?
I think the big problem that we're going to watch the next year is we've gone through 3 years of the Biden administration, and we can quibble about Afghanistan, pacing on Ukraine, how they're handling Israel, Gaza, but people are pretty used to a degree of competence from the Biden team. I think this, paired with the reality that, Donald Trump in the prediction markets is the most likely person to be president in 14 months, is going to lead to a lot of hand-wringing from U.S. allies and partners. And, since we recorded our last episode, I've been in a bunch of Asian locations and a couple of European ones. And the first, second, third, last question is all Trump related. And it's tied into the Congress also, right? Because it's this perception that actually U.S. leadership is needed more now than ever, but the U.S. may not actually be able to lead.
So can I, having not been invited to these meetings, and one of these days Zach is going to take me on one of his junkets.
I'm just imagining Zach in the sky in one of those like Qatar Airways, like living room
just
suites
looking
in the
down
air.
the window and flipping the bird at me, like down there on the ground. I want to hear more about this because when they ask you this question, what do they expect you to say? They expect you to say, it's going to be okay. He's not going to win. You have nothing to worry about. Because they can see the predictions markets. They can read the polls. They know that there's a 50-50 chance. It's a coin toss.
I don't think they're asking for predictions about whether it's going to happen. I think they want to know what do you do? You've got 1 year, right? When Trump won the first time, none of them thought Trump was going to win. So they didn't do anything to prepare.
Right.
So if you had a year and a 50-50 chance that Trump was going to be president, what would you do now to prepare for that possibility? Are there things that you can do to lock the U.S. into the commitments that the U.S. has and the regions you want the U.S. to be?
Well, change a law to make it harder to leave NATO, because right now it's just a signature on a piece of paper by the president.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, I think the legislative changes are going to be tough when you've got House Republicans that are probably going to oppose anything that is obviously constraining on Trump. Right. And you might not have an NDAA before the next election, before the next presidential election. So you might not have a actual, legislative way to get anything substantive through like that. But that's the big question they're asking.
I guess I would say get in a time machine and prepare for this after 2017, when it was obvious to you that he could get elected and therefore could get elected again.
No, but I think after 2017 and after January 6th especially, most of these folks looked at the U.S. and thought, wow, that was ugly, but at least they learned their lesson.
You dodged a bullet there.
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
Yes, and I will say I have the same conversations with people, and they are very worried about what's going to happen. They're also worried because they're concerned about who might staff a Trump administration this time. Although I will say there's always no shortage of people who are willing to sacrifice their character for a little temporary power.
Secretary of Defense Ryan Evans. You heard it here first, folks.
But there is grave concern about a Trump administration coming in and what that might be. But there's also some concern about what the next Biden administration will look like as well, and especially if Congress is still going to be in turmoil. Not hoping anything bad might happen, but if Kamala Harris is an unknown quantity on foreign policy and what her instincts might be there. I just think that there's a lot of...
You're alluding to the fact that he's older and might not.
Yeah, and I'm being serious. I mean this in a very serious way. This is not jokey. So there is concern about that. Now, Chris might say, well, so what if the United States isn't leading on things in the world? And that's a fair point too. But I'm going to say, how does Europe really look right now after 2 years of war? As Ryan mentioned, their industrial base is still really struggling. Germany is talking about pulling out of a fighter project because they can't get along with France. There's just a number of things that are still going wrong there. And I know that there's the idea that we can pull the rug out from under Europe and they'll have to grow up, or that, the rest of the world can just learn to change without us. And maybe we're spending too much money on defending other parts of the country, but I don't want to see the United States lose good influence in places where we can have it.
Okay, I want to take a little break here to talk about the fact that it's been 5 years of net assessment. It's been 5 years since, two of you, Chris and Melanie, and our good friend Brian McGrath, who is probably yelling at clouds on his back porch in Maryland right now.
Yes.
And then later Zach joined the show when Brian stepped back. What do you guys think? 5 years, you got a nice base of fans. You're going to be returning to these bi-weekly conversations. What are your thoughts on 5 years?
I do want to say I'm really grateful for our fans. And it's been interesting to get all these messages in the last couple of months. Even through last week, I was sending some to Chris about where's net assessment, what's happened, going to conferences, going to AUSA or SMD or places like that, but also going around the world and getting messages from people in other countries or having those conversations about, we want to know what's going on in the United States. What do you think? And so that has been really, really gratifying in the last couple of months. But I have to say, we should have a show on what have we changed our minds on in the last 5 years, or what have we been convinced about, or what were we totally right about, But the world has seen a lot of change in the last 5 years. There's always change in 5 years, but it's been really interesting and thought-provoking to be a part of the conversation.
Yeah, I think what I hear from when I meet people and they ask about what's going on with the show, and they say we miss it. They say they like that it's different. It's a different kind of show, and I've thought about this a lot because I've missed the show because I missed hanging out with my friends. I did not know Melanie or Zach before we started doing this show. And
I didn't even like you before I started doing the show.
And I think what's surprising to people is that we clearly have different opinions on substantive things, and yet we can manage to have those conversations and not be jerks about it. And it's a sad commentary on our society today that this is so refreshing and rare, right? The other thing about this show that is unique, one time we experimented with having a guest on the show, and we will never do that again. Richard Haas.
Oh yeah, that's when you guys let Richard off easy. Right. I remember that episode.
Yeah, exactly. And there's something about the structure of these conversations around a particular, article or paper that I think is unique, and I think it occupies an important space in the national security dialogue.
I will say the terrifying thing about some of this is I just got back from Australia, and people actually do listen and remember to these screeds that we've had, which is kind of terrifying sometimes.
Especially your thoughts on AUKUS.
I was reminded many times, including by some fairly senior officials, of very specific things that I'd said about AUKUS that I still stand by, but might have framed differently if I were saying them to very senior officials.
Hey, I love AUKUS, so looking for that Australia invitation.
Right. I will like AUKUS if I get a flight. There we go.
That's all it takes. Hey, folks, if you just pay for plane flights for all of us to places, we'll say whatever you want on this show.
But your comments on AUKUS, it's not like criticizing the Australians, except for their perhaps lack of realism.
It's
totally us.
Yeah.
Amanda Sloat, the director for Europe on the NSC, is leaving the administration. In the profile of her leaving, she made sure that she was able to express that AUKUS was a total surprise to her, and it pissed her off a lot. It wasn't stated in that terms, but you could tell, not reading the clear text between the lines.
I am well aware of that because the day after AUKUS was announced, I had a meeting with Amanda where she also made very clear that AUKUS was a complete surprise to her.
I hear it was a complete surprise to the Department of Defense too, which is the interesting part about it. So, what should we expect in terms of big topics that you're going to tackle over the next few months?
Look, we just did a conference on space, and I had very little to do with it. Kelly Grieco, my colleague, senior fellow at Stimson, was the sort of lead person on it, and Evan Cooper. And I think back to the show that we did on space a few years ago, which was the only time that I had really dipped into this topic. And now I'm really interested in talking about space, but not in the way that is usually talked about in this town, which is around competition with China and Space Force is driving the conversation. Because what's happening in space is a whole bunch of people are active in space who aren't even states, right? I mean, the proliferation of actors is really important and I think really interesting. So that's one that I'd be interested in. But look, I still think that one of the things about this show that's so unique, we really do look for our favorite article of the previous 2 weeks, the previous 4 weeks.
Or least favorite.
Or least favorite, exactly. And a fan of the show, who is very excited that we're restarting up again, is sorry that we did not cover Stephen Biddle's article, which came out over the summer. And he really wanted us to talk about Stephen Biddle's article in Foreign Affairs. But I think it's probably too late for that.
We can go back in history.
We could go back.
Then we can talk about Jake Sullivan's article and the non-article.
We could definitely talk about Jake Sullivan's article.
Are you guys just going to talk about really unimpressive articles?
No.
Is that what? That's the pattern I'm picking up from the next.
Actually, can I ask a question to you as an editor?
It's 2 questions.
Well, I don't edit anymore.
No. But you did.
Yeah, I did for many years. But
and yours was would you have allowed the National Security Advisor to do what Foreign Affairs allowed Jake Sullivan to do?
What do you mean by that specifically?
He changed the article.
Oh, no, definitely not. Nothing against the crew at Foreign Affairs, who I know some of them and have a lot of respect for them, but I would not have let them do that. Definitely not.
I don't know.
This is just why running a victory lap is never a good idea, especially when you're not actually across the finish line yet. Like, I don't know who chose the pullout quote about the Middle East being quieter than it's been.
Yeah, for listeners who don't know about this, it was that there was a passage in the Sullivan's original article that made it to print, the print edition, about how things are fine and dandy with Israel and the Middle East. And then, of course, October 7th happened. And then on the online version, it was just deleted.
Look, David Rothkopf, and you might want to take this out, but he said, this is just fine that Foreign Affairs did this. And Jake Sullivan is such a smart guy. And, this was such a good insight into the administration anyway. You know what? No one believes that he believes that someone from the Trump administration would have been able to do that. And the other part of this is there is something instructive and historically enriching to look at what the administration thinks their accomplishments are, because it gives some insight into what they think works and what doesn't. And that's fine if they want to have an addendum at the bottom, but to take off the website, and fine, we all subscribe to the print edition, blah, blah. But to take, and if you want, you can find in other places, what he originally said. But I agree with Ryan. I have nothing against the people at Foreign Affairs, and I enjoy Foreign Affairs. We talk
about Foreign Affairs articles all the time.
But this was a real misstep because they thought these things were working. They thought that they were right about some things. And I'm not blaming what happened in the end or the events that followed on them. But it just gives some insight into the administration that is now gone.
Well, I think that what I would have given him the opportunity to do is not to change any of the text in the article, but to write a note that would appear at the top saying, listen, I wrote this, obviously this happened, here's what my thinking is on it. Whatever he would choose to say there would be up to him. But yeah, I think editing out the past of what you actually said is generally not a good idea. So something is going to be changing about net assessment, and that is it is going to be sponsored. At least the vast majority of episodes will be by different folks. And if you're interested in being one of those folks, whether you're in publishing, in education, in some kind of commercial entity, a sports team perhaps. I know Chris is a big fan of the Rangers, and because they defeated the Orioles soundly,
and everyone else.
It was but the Orioles especially. And this episode actually is sponsored by the Rangers.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much.
In honor of Chris.
Yeah, appreciate that.
But no, seriously, if you're interested in signing up to be a sponsor of this show, what this money will go to is really to cover costs and pay these three wonderful people who have been doing this as a labor of love for 5 years. They didn't demand it. It's something that I felt was very important. I think sometimes they wished I wasn't pushing it so hard. But it's important, and we're going to get it done. So if you want to be part of supporting what I think is one of the most important conversations out there on national security, shoot us an email at editor@warintherocks.com. Someone will get that to me, and I will email you.
You can also drop cash off and just for care of Zack Cooper at the American Enterprise Institute. That works.
But Zack actually only accepts payment in rubles. So if you,
I have a PayPal account that I can share. Yeah.
Let's talk about something substantive before we end this episode. There's going to be a meeting supposedly in San Francisco between President Biden and Chairman Xi. What led to this? I mean, there's this whole administration, if anything, has been defined by a lack of diplomacy and Chinese hostility to diplomacy with the United States, especially since that infamous engagement between Jake Sullivan and his Chinese counterpart early on. How did we get here? What are they going to talk about? What have they agreed to do?
Well, they've agreed to talk. I think that's the agreement, right? We've had a whole series of meetings, really starting back in May, walking through to November. So 6 months of meetings, mostly U.S. leaders going to Beijing. And now we've got Xi and Biden meeting on Wednesday in San Francisco. Let me say one good thing about this and one bad thing from my perspective. The good thing is it's so hard to understand what's going on in China right now because the Chinese system is so opaque. that I actually do believe that it's really important that Biden have a chance to look Xi in the eyes and have a fairly long time with him to get through the talking points and then ask some questions, both to understand what information is getting up to Xi and to try and get a sense, if possible, of how he thinks about some issues. So that's the benefit of this.
It's always the challenge with dealing with these authoritarian systems is you don't know what information is getting up to the top.
And it's way worse now than it used to be in China, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
and they seem to think at the senior levels that the economy is just fine and there's not that much blowback for the foreign policy actions they're taking. So I think we have to test out whether that's true. I think the downside, though, is there's not going to be a lot of substantial deliverables. And most of the deliverables, from my understanding, are agreements to have more meetings. That is pretty unsatisfying.
John Kerry announced some sort of climate stuff. There's Chinese agreement with, but he wasn't specific, I don't think.
Yeah. I think there's going to be a lot of that. Maybe something on fentanyl.
I was going to say fentanyl.
Although I think that's still under debate.
Melanie, you just threw your hands up in the air in frustration.
The last show we had, we talked about, I think it was Blinken went over there. Was it Blinken? In May?
I think that's right. Yeah.
No, but he didn't go because of the balloon.
No, but then he did go.
Then he did go. Right. Yeah.
And he talked about fentanyl. Okay, so then Janet Yellen goes over, and I think Gina Raimondo went over, and everybody, as Zach said, we keep going over there. And I do believe in talking, and I do believe that, conversations are always better than conflict. But it would be nice if the administration could figure out a way to not have all the optics be us being obsequious towards them. Now, I'm glad that she's coming. I'm glad that they're going to have a conversation. Do I trust that Biden's going to be able to look him in the eye and get a sense of what's going on? Not really. I don't know. I mean, there's going to be other people in the room. I'm a little concerned about the decision making there. But again, I'm glad that the conversation's going to be had. I'm just not really sure. Again, what are they going to get out of this? Because it's just always more. We're going to talk later. So I guess that's my question.
I understand what you mean, Melanie. I think the reason that they want to do this face-to-face meeting, even with the low expectations and the unlikelihood of having anything major come out of it, is a sign on both sides, but I think more so even on the Chinese side, that they don't like the tone and tenor of the discussion around China as it's been playing out in the United States, and perhaps a hope that recreating a dialogue, an actual dialogue, not just one conversation, but a series of conversations will help to dial down the tensions a little bit. Maybe.
So do you really think that the top leadership doesn't understand what's going on with the economy, or the sentiment in the people about what's going on in the economy?
I think that's what some in the top leadership are telling foreigners. So, either they may actually believe that because they don't know, or they may know and not want to tell foreigners that they're very concerned. Or maybe they know and they just don't worry about it because, frankly, they know the economy is going to slow down and what they care about is social stability. And a slowing economy, if they manage it a certain way, might not actually be a threat to the party. So I think these are the kinds of questions we've got to be able to probe on. And look, I take the point, Mel. We may ask these questions and get nowhere. But I don't know there's not a lot of cost for asking the questions as long as we don't give things away in the run up to the meeting.
Okay, well, I would feel a lot better if they were doing this and giving more than $2 billion in the supplemental. And I do want to say one thing. I have seen from a number of sources, and Zach will probably confirm this, I hope, that, there is more open communication and that people are feeling like some of the tensions, are lowering, the temperature's lowering a little bit. And that would be a good thing if we can have at least conflict lines established.
Zach, were you in Australia when their prime minister was in China? Did that overlap? Because that was an interesting visit.
Yeah, I was there as their team left.
What do you make of that in relation to what we've been talking about here?
Well, I think it's really tough if you're a U.S. ally or partner to figure out what you're supposed to be doing on China, right? So I think there's some nervousness in Washington about Albanese going to Beijing. But, it's kind of hard to complain as an American when we've got a big meeting going on between Xi and Biden in San Francisco, and people are making a lot of hay out of it. So I think if you're a U.S. ally, you're kind of wondering, well, do you want us to do this? Do you not want us to do this?
Especially on trade, which is what most of the visit was about, at least from public reporting, when the U.S. has not shown any leadership in trade in the Asia Pacific.
And let's be honest, if you're Australia, China's a huge trade partner, right?
Not as huge as it used to be for them, but I think that's what he went there to.
Yeah.
But still the most important bilateral trading relationship that Australia has still. Yeah.
So do I have some concerns about delinking of the American position and some of its allies on China? Of course. But also, we went through sort of 2.5 years where the U.S. was taking a really firm stance against China. And now that stance is shifting a bit, and the Australians are also shifting, and so are some others. I wouldn't be surprised if the Koreans and Japanese go ahead with their own meetings. We've seen the Europeans do these meetings. So I don't think they're trying to follow the U.S., but I don't think they want to be completely out of line with where American policymakers are either.
Do you think, their reporting is Kurt Campbell's going to be nominated to be Deputy Secretary of State, assuming he's confirmed? What effect do you think that'll have on the Asia policy, not just him assuming that role, but him leaving the sort of super empowered director role that he has, the czar role that he has on the National Security Council staff?
I think Kurt is the big idea guy, right? Kurt throws, long passes and hopes to complete them. And I think what you've got in the last year of the administration is they're going to be throwing a lot of, 5-yard passes and trying to make short completions.
He's using a sports metaphor.
I'm sorry. I'm not allowed to do that. Okay. We can
that was
re-record.
directed to Ryan, not me. I just want to make that clear.
Right.
Yeah, I don't. People are always surprised. They're not anymore because they know me, but that I have zero interest in sports. Except I'm very interested in landing the Rangers as sponsors of the show. And have Chris will narrate the pre-roll and the mid-roll.
I will read the ad. Yeah. I will read that ad copy.
Yeah, it'd be great.
Congratulations to the world champion Rangers.
Yeah. So if you're out there, if you're in Rangers executive leadership. So one of the things I love about net assessment is the airing of grievances and the attaboys. Let's do the attaboy. Well, someone that or something that has earned your admiration lately. And I didn't prepare you for this, so I know you didn't have time to think of something clever.
From the last couple of months, my attaboy would be the Camp David trilat, which I think if we'd had a show, we would have talked about the U.S., Japan, Korea trilateral meeting. I just said that Kurt Campbell likes to throw really long passes and hope to connect them. And this is one which you would have thought was going to land incomplete, and they made it work, right? The idea that Japan and Korea, despite all of the historical baggage, are going to be in the spot they are right now would have been really hard to imagine a year ago. And yet I sense the relationship has shifted completely. Korea skeptics in Tokyo, the first thing they'll say now about Korea, about President Yoon, is about how courageous he is and how shockingly impressed they are with him and his team. And, in Korea, there's a lot of talk about how do they bring Japan into parts of their strategy, like extended deterrence conversations, which even the Japanese aren't even quite ready for. So I think this is one area. If I was Joe Biden and I was looking for a nice little thing to do towards the end of the year, I would write a nominating letter to the Nobel Peace Prize for President Yoon, Prime Minister Kishida, for trying their very best to get their two countries on the same page.
I am going to give mine to the Philippines. They have been taking it from China, and they've been really good about their public campaign strategy and showing what's going on and demonstrating the real problems that are caused by China economically, but, just the continuous harassment. And I think that that's an interesting change. And I will give credit to the administration for working that relationship. They do not have, Trump had a different relationship there with a different president. And I don't know that anybody could have foreseen this a couple of years ago. China's doing a lot of the heavy lifting for us on that. But I'm very impressed at the Philippines and the openness they are to the United States, reopening bases and having new basing agreements and working with us on training exercises and that kind of thing.
All right. Well, this is going to be because you set me up for this, and I wasn't ready for this. But I want to give a shout out to my colleague Kelly Grieco, who, in addition to the space conference, which I already mentioned, she just published a paper for us at Stimson with Colonel Max Bremer, the Air Force. They collaborate on many papers together. They've got a new paper on air logistics, which I think is really, really interesting and just the start of a much bigger discussion around logistics in the Indo-Pacific. Again, all of you know I was in the Navy. I was in the Pacific. Of my 4 years in the Navy, I was in the Pacific for 4 weeks. And the one thing that I learned from the 4 weeks in the Pacific side of the US Navy is that's a big ass ocean. And figuring out
it's a technical term. You can tell Chris is in the Navy.
Big ass ocean, and like figuring out how logistics is really, really important.
This was your Tom Friedman taxi experience, and you spent 4 weeks in a taxi.
That is not even close to. That is not even close to a Tom Friedman taxi.
It is a good.
That is not a good analog.
The board topic's very good, and I'm looking forward to reading it. It's a hugely important topic, very important to General Brown, the current Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, is very important to the Marine Commandant. Hopefully he's recovering from his heart attack swiftly, but really critical issue for us to figure out in the Indo-Pacific. Thanks for doing this, guys, and I'm happy to have you back on the air pretty soon. Everyone at home, stay safe, stay healthy, and support Net Assessment by becoming a sponsor.